Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for this week's episode of College Journey Conversations. We're excited to have with us tonight Neill Seltzer with Mindprint Learning. Good evening, Neill. How are you?
I'm great. Delighted to be here.
Man, I can't believe the fake background you have behind you.
That's actually the real deal. That's really no Zoom background here.
Where are you actually situated? Give us a little bit of geography so we kind of know where you're coming from.
I am on an island off the coast of Maine.
And that is a spectacular view. The fact that you have the window open with no screens on it is tells everything. Right now, you're wearing a little bit of a light jacket there, so it must be a little cool up there.
It is a little cooler. 14 months ago, when my kids' New York City school went online, that day we packed them up, headed up here, and we've been here ever since. But in about 10 days, we returned as a family to our New York City apartment.
Oh my gosh! Well,
it's going to be quite a shift.
I'm not sure if you're going to be welcomed home or not, right? I mean, that's a hard view to give up there, but I'm sure you'll be glad to be back in your old stomping grounds. Now, New York, when you say New York, you mean New York City?
New York City, yep.
Wow. Well, we're excited to have you all the way from Maine. As you know, we're here located just outside of the Atlanta metro area in Peachtree City. Mm-hmm. And it has been, well, your typical Georgia weather, you know, a little bit of mugginess, a little bit of storms here and there throughout the week, but it's pretty muggy outside. But we're in short sleeves, so we've welcomed summer very much so. Well, we're super glad to have you today. Just like all of our conversations is going to be just that, a dialogue between you and I on a little bit about what Mindprint is all about. But before we get to it, I think I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you've been involved in over the years. I know you're a long-time test prep veteran, as your profile has once said. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you've been involved with, kind of what's led you to Mindprint Learning and why that's so important. I know there's a lot of questions there, but take your time and
share with us. So let's see. I saw my first SAT tutorial kid in 1992 in Hong Kong. I was living there. I moved there after college. I was teaching literature, and I got recruited to do some test prep and did SAT prep there for a couple of years. And the lovely thing about SAT prep is you can fall out of an airplane just about anywhere and land and find some students. Yeah. So I went from there to Miami. I like to say I came halfway back to the States, Miami being kind of in between, as it were. And from there, I stayed mostly in the test prep and tutoring industry. I was tutoring, then I started running test prep companies. I eventually ran a company that owned a whole bunch of test prep franchises. Then I got involved on the R&D side of things. So I started writing the books, writing the courses, writing the testing engines. One point I kind of burned out and tried really hard to get out. And then the GRE switched and it went cat, and they called me up and said, "Oh, we need help." You know, everything with the letters GR and E on it had to be changed.
Right.
So I got sucked back in, and it's well, let me put it this way. After 30 years, and I don't know how many students, I couldn't tell you to this day if I am the greatest SAT tutor who has ever lived, or possibly the worst, or somewhere in the middle, right? Like it's very hard to know what that range is. And so much of what we do is based on intuition, is based on trial and error, hard-earned trial and error. We've tried this with lots and lots of kids, but it's really hard to know with any one kid. Like, yes, scores go up, and when they do go up, you pat yourself on the back and you said, "I did a good job."
Right.
But But how do you know? Could they have gone up twice as much? Right? Did you do the right thing at the right time?
Yeah.
And that's what led me to Mindprint. I was running a tutoring company in New York City that I had helped to build, and I bumped into Mindprint, and for the very first time, all of these things that we've done on hunch and intuition for all of these years were suddenly, in fact, knowable and measurable.
Mm.
And that was like catnip to me, to sort of go in and suddenly have words for things that I had been observing with students for years, to suddenly see the connection as to why some things work some of the times but don't work all of the times.
Interesting.
And I was sitting in the back of a tutor training, and they were talking about, they're all sharing their favorite reading comp technique. And I was sitting in the back. At first, I was thinking, all right, I've heard this conversation 100 times over the years. But as they were talking about, well, should the kid read the whole passage? Should they read the passage first? Should they not read the passage? Should they skim? Should they be underlining? Should they be mapping the passage? I just started thinking, wait a minute, there's an answer to this.
Yeah.
There is a real knowable answer to this. You don't have to guess. And you can walk into even a brand new student with confidence and say, not, this is what I think you should do because this is what I think all kids should do. It's, this is what you need to do because I know who you are as a learner. And that, that to me is just, it's, I think this is where tutoring's going, and it's changed the whole game for me. I mean, it's still a new thing. We're on the cutting edge here.
Yeah.
But no more of this either one size fits all approach or best guess approach.
So that's fascinating, because what you're really saying, Neill, is, and please, like, correct me obviously if I'm not hearing this correctly, but it sounds as though what you're saying is, over the years, test prep, and when we're talking about test prep, mainly we're speaking of ACT, SAT test prep, which of course is something that we offer here at Capstone as well, as you very well know. But it seems as though what you're saying is that test prep as a whole has kind of been like throwing darts at a dartboard, and you with your efforts as a educator, you do your best to get it in the bullseye, but it doesn't always land there, and we don't always know why it doesn't always land there. Some may be good dead on, others may be way off the mark, and we have no explanation because we did everything we did with the last person we worked with the same way we did with this person. And so that changes. But what you're saying is that Mindprint learning has come along now and can identify very specific things as to why perhaps the scores are either less than, or the student is just not getting it, whatever it is, whatever they're wrestling with or having difficulty with, not necessarily in the way of content per se, but perhaps in the process of understanding that content or delivering the results of a particular reading section as it relates to those questions. Now go ahead and take it from there and correct me wherever you need to.
Well, so thank you for that. There's a lot to dig in there, and the first thing is, I'm talking about it through the lens of test prep, but actually this has implications for education at large, certainly for parenting, and really just understanding and knowing who your student is, who your kid is, as a learner, whether we're talking about achievement, let's call it grades, skill mastery, or standardized tests, or whether we're talking about, behavioral and social emotional learning, right? Are they engaged?
Right.
Are they ready to learn?
Right.
Are they struggling with attention? That's the goal is often quite clear. Generally, everyone agrees on the goal. I need to get the score up. I need to fix their reading comp. I need to fix the like bad grade that just happened in algebra.
Right. Or I just need to
That
pass this
part
one
we
test.
all, yeah, that part we
Yeah.
know about. Or just frankly, like I want to yell at my kid less, like because homework is a battle every day. Right? Like that stuff we tend to agree on.
Right.
It's the why that used to be opaque.
Yeah.
And is now increasingly knowable. And if you don't know the why, it's pretty darn hard to fix the what.
Right.
Just to sort of give you a general, like, here's kind of a macro Uber question on this. We often talk a lot about when we see a student struggling, and everyone's going to struggle sooner or later with something.
Right.
One of the first questions is it a can't or is it a won't?
Oh.
And what's tricky about that question, and it's a really hard thing to wrestle with as a tutor, especially with the younger kids, right? Like you're sitting in front of let's say a 10-year-old, and the kid is squirming out of his chair. And on one hand, is it because, well, he just missed lunch today? And like, so we need to like get the kid a snack and then we can get back on track. Or is it because we've suddenly hit a cognitive weakness and the kid has lost focus because we're talking about something that he's having trouble grasping?
Right.
So if it's a can't and you treat it like it's a won't, then you're going to lose that kid, right? If you say to the kid, sit up, pay attention, you need to focus on this, you may be asking the student to do something that they're not capable of or not ready to do, and you haven't given them strategies to do yet. And sooner or later, they're just going to stop listening because you're going down the wrong road.
Right.
Now, on the flip side, if it's a won't and you treat it like a can't, now you're letting the kid off the hook. Now you're leaving points on the table and you're not pushing the kid as hard as you can, given that kid's cognitive ability. So we just start with like that macro framework and knowing when to push, when to ease off, and when you start hitting resistance, why?
Right.
And that, that changes everything.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it sounds almost too good to be true, right? Right. But we've seen it happen and we've watched it. And what's really cool about this, and Neill, you and I we go back just a little bit. We've been having many conversations, not live, but in real time, about this particular aspect of student learning. And I'm pretty amazed that the breadth of offering that this provides to families. So when we kind of opened up the segment here talking about test prep and kind of your background in test prep, but truly it leaps ahead of test prep. In fact, test prep is kind of probably almost the last hurdle in which Mindprint learning and its tools can benefit. We can go as early back as, or in front of as second grade, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Second grade and up can utilize this, and that's pretty amazing, I think. So what's the difference? Is there a big difference between understanding, say, for a second grader versus a 17-year-old?
Well, actually, first, Mark, let me just back up a little bit and define what the it is.
Yeah. Oh, that's
right. So let me ground folks a little bit.
Perfect.
What we offer is a 1-hour online self-paced cognitive assessment. We didn't develop it. It was actually developed at Penn Medicine at the Brain Lab with a grant from the National Institute of Health. And it was predominantly an academic tool. So large research institutions have been using it for years for large scale academic research. NASA used it, still uses it on their astronauts today. They used it on the famous twin study. Anyone who is examining any aspect of cognition at scale, this is the go-to battery.
Interesting.
And so your question of a second grader versus a 17-year-old, actually, the battery that students will take is whether it's a second grader, whether it's a 17-year-old, or whether it's like Mark Kelly and the astronauts, it's the exact same test.
Interesting.
But what we have is this massive data set that allows us to norm it by age and know what is age appropriate.
Okay.
So if I'm testing your verbal reasoning skills, what looks spot on developmentally to a 10-year-old is going to look pretty slow for a 19-year-old. And so this norming is really crucial for making sense of it.
Yes.
But it's so the test itself, it consists of 9 tests. Each one is short. They look like brain games. There's no math. There's no reading comp. There's no multiple choice. Doesn't look like anything you've done in school. But what we're testing are actually the 10 cognitive skills that are most closely correlated to academic success. Now, academic success is pretty broad, so it tends to correlate really to success at large. We're focusing predominantly on K-12 education, but we're looking across 4 primary domains. So we've got complex reasoning,
Yep.
so abstract reasoning, verbal reasoning, and spatial perception. We've got your executive function skills. So complex reasoning, can you understand the material in front of you? And that happens in these 3 different domains. Executive functions, are you ready and prepared to learn? So we're looking at attention, we're looking at working memory, and we're looking at flexible thinking. Then we've got memory skills, your verbal and your nonverbal. Those are your long-term memory skills. Yeah. And everyone's got a unique combination. Some verbal is stronger, some visual is stronger. And then we're looking at efficiency. So how efficiently and accurately do you do all these things? So we look at processing speed and visual motor speed. Now, that's a lot. Each one is pretty short. But when you start putting all these things together, the picture of who the student is as a learner starts to become clear.
Right.
And what to do with it is a different matter, right? Like, it's one thing to know who the student is, but the goal, like, the knowledge is good.
Yep.
But ideally, what we're really aiming at over time is a student's self-awareness and self-efficacy skills, right? So it's ideally, we want everyone playing to their strengths when possible. And when something rests upon one of their weaker skills, we want to give them clear strategies so that those weaker skills are not holding them back.
Right.
And that's that is eminently doable.
Right.
Not always easy. It takes time, but it is doable. And ultimately, the net result of that is a student who knows how to learn him or herself. And you can start that process at any time. We as adults, we've been doing this for years. Like, there are things that I know that I'm bad at. So I need to make sure when I walk out of a meeting that I jot down notes, because quite frankly, if you ask me about it next week, it's gone from my head. Right? So I've developed strategies to ensure that I'm successful despite my weaker verbal memory skills. Right? A 17-year-old or a 10-year-old, sometimes they've done that. Oftentimes they haven't done that. And when they don't have the skills, what happens is they get frustrated. And they get a lot of negative feedback, and that can then impact their self-image, right? Like, you and I have talked about students who walk in and they say, "I suck at math."
Right.
And like, how many times have you heard that before? And the minute they say it, it instantaneously becomes true.
Yeah.
But it's not true. There's a whole bunch of different aspects to math. There are abstract and conceptual. There's memory aspects. There's processing aspects. And they have likely struggled in math because it hasn't come to them in the way they are ready to receive it, if that makes sense.
Right.
But that is, in fact, a fixable thing. Do you know, by the way, here's a I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Oh, I love it.
Do you know what skill of those 10 that I mentioned?
Yes.
But just you can just tell me in general, is most closely associated with success in middle school math?
Which one in middle school math?
Right. If I were to
I'm going to
measure,
say,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to say abstract reasoning.
So abstract reasoning is number 2.
Oh,
And you're right. Like abstract reasoning is in general most strongly correlated to math and STEM.
right.
But in fact, number 1 is verbal reasoning, even on the math. And the reason for that is because when teachers are standing in front of kids in math class, they're talking at them, and they are leaning disproportionately on verbal skills, and the kids have to receive it in a verbal way. And there's word problems; they have to explain themselves. In the younger grades, it's actually often verbal or nonverbal memory because they got to memorize math facts.
Yeah.
As they get older, the memory is less determinative, and the complex reasoning skills are more determinative. But if you have a student with weak verbal reasoning or weaker on a relative basis, and we all have our unique combination of strengths and weaknesses, with weaker verbal reasoning through middle school, they could very well leave 8th grade believing that they hate math, that they suck at math, math is not for them, and avoid it like the plague.
Right.
And that's a tragedy because they could actually be great at math, right? Like they could have fantastic abstract reasoning skills, and they could end up loving math. I am a case in point in that. I picked the college that I went to almost entirely. I went to Vassar College, and one of the primary reasons that I took it was there was no distribution requirements, and they weren't going to force me to take a math class because I believed that I suck at math. And I have spent the last 30 years coaching SAT math. In fact, it's really fun. And I learned it in a way in high school that didn't work for me.
Right.
And I believed that it was not, but I was a verbal guy, not a math guy.
I had a great friend of mine who's also in the test prep industry. In fact, I think you know him, but we'll save that for another conversation. But he told me that math is very much like a language. It's like learning a new language, and if you can learn the language, math becomes relatively easy for you. And so, if, like you said, back in those early years, if you just didn't quite get the language of what that math meant, and there's a lot of cognitive structure there that is required in order to get all of the pieces in place for more advanced math later on down the road.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there are some kids for whom math absolutely comes naturally, and there are some kids for whom they're going to struggle no matter what. Like we know this in geometry versus algebra. The key is how do we give them strategies so that that cognitive profile doesn't keep them from succeeding? Does it make it miserable and something that gives them a stomach ache every morning before they got to go to school and show up in that damn algebra class, right? Like that we don't want, right? Like they're not going to go on to be a mathematician. That's fine, right? They could be an English major. That was me. But let's make sure that this isn't holding them back, that this isn't getting in the way.
Yeah. And you know, I've always been a believer in if you have the right tools, then you can address the problem far easier than if you are trying to make a tool work for you.
Yeah.
And it's not intended.
I would take that one step further. So there's the right tool, but then I want to match the tool to the job.
Oh yeah, good.
Right. So what we talk about all the time is right strategy, right kid, right time.
Nice.
There's lots of strategies for test prep, for math, for learning that are terrific strategies, but they're not all equally impactful for all kids, right? Like these great reading comp strategies. Like yes, in a perfect world, I'd have every one of my kids going back and checking answers every single time. For some kids, that's going to be the difference between them succeeding and failing on reading comp. For other kids, that's not their problem. And if I teach it that way, because I teach it to all kids that way,
Right.
then in fact, I am wasting precious time treating something that's not going to yield points
Right.
because I'm solving something that's not a problem, even though it's a good strategy. It's
Right.
just not the high impact strategy for that particular kid. So yeah, let's say right tool, but let's extend it to say right tool for the right kid, which means you got to know what that kid needs.
So that bears a question. In the event that a student is able to take this assessment, this test that provides this data and this report. I've got one of those reports for a 17-year-old that took it here at Capstone, sitting here in front of me. And it goes into such great detail of finding where that particular student is among its peers. You know, this particular report in regards to the student's flexible thinking says that he's ahead of his peers and he's in the top 16% of his peer group. And that this particular person performed in the top 5% of his peer group. It's telling you quite extensive and detailed information. And so, you know, with a report like this, which is pretty phenomenal, what good is it if it's just handed to the student?
Well, so first thing, I think I mentioned that we're normed by age. So
Yeah.
we go from 7 all the way up through 21.
Yeah.
But our primary audience really is the tutors and the educators.
Okay.
What I want to do is equip them with the information that they need to figure out how to make this kid successful. And so I want to put this information in their hands. Now it's great for kids to know. And especially as the kids get older, like part of the challenge is developing that self-awareness,
right,
so that they know they can recognize when they're likely to struggle and apply the right strategy when it happens and not get discouraged because it's now a known thing and they have strategies to deal with it. So that self-awareness and self-knowledge is critical. But I wouldn't expect any student or any parent, if you dropped their 10 cognitive skills in their lap, to suddenly know what to do about it.
right.
And while I can measure these things and I can generate the report, I don't know the kid, and I'm not sitting in front of the kid. And all of these things can be expressed in a nearly infinite number of ways. Some kids, faced with a challenge, like are going to buckle down and work twice as hard. Some kids are going to get pissed off and throw the book across the room and say, "I'm out of here." Right? Like they could be expressed very different ways.
Right.
And it requires a thoughtful, sensitive educator to make those adjustments and adjust their process to fit the kid. And that's ultimately why you turn to a professional.
Right.
That's why you want someone like you and not someone like that you grabbed off of Craigslist, who could be, anyone who can spell SAT, right?
Right, exactly. So the student gets a report, or we can say even the parent receives this report, either offline or from you all. And is it advisable to encourage the parent to take it into the teacher and say, "Look, we just had this, and this is like a map of my child's brain, and it would be, I think, very advantageous for my child to have you review this so that his learning can be maximized." What say you on that?
Well, so a couple things. The bulk of Mindprint actually is bringing this into a K-12 setting. So most of our clients are in fact schools or school districts, and they're using it specifically to help teachers differentiate their instruction based on the needs of their kids, right? And most kids in school are grouped either by age or by a test score. But when their learning styles are radically different, but the test score is the same, they get lumped together, and one kid's bored, one kid is lost, and one kid is struggling, and one kid's focused, right? Because that's what happens when you get a group of kids that are totally disparate in their needs. For the most part, I think almost all teachers have a professional teaching degree. The language that they find in our report will be familiar. They are more equipped to use these insights than just about anyone else. And so that it's a great thing to do. Absolutely.
I kind of led you to that answer, of course. But I find it to be very advantageous if the parents can be very much in control of kind of feeding this information, especially if the school district or the private school or whatever education system they have, even at a homeschool setting, it could be advantageous. Kind of takes the charge and moves forward with this information so that all aspects of learning can be addressed. Both the things that the student is extremely good at, and then those that they kind of need a little extra support in. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah, we're talking about it very much in an academic setting, and that's I think the primary use. But I see it everywhere, right? Like you're walking out of the house and you yell up to your kid, like, don't forget your backpack and don't forget your keys. And 5 minutes later, the kid comes down, no backpack and no keys. What do? You go, like, you start yelling at him. You're not listening to me. What's wrong with you? I just told you.
Right.
If you know that your student has weak verbal memory, then you know that just yelling up the stairs, don't forget X, Y, and Z verbally as a list is not the way to make them retain these things.
Right.
And now you can actually take the temperature down and you can meet them in a way that's going to get you the outcome that you want.
So this is everyday experience, kind of using this data and this information to just really build you as an individual, like really reinforce how you interact with others. It is a social build tool, which is kind of an interesting, not just for the student, but for the parents as well, right? So that kind of hitches on to the side of its value, even more value, and that's crazy. That's crazy exciting to be able to see it in real time. I do want to spend a little bit of time, Neill, on an aspect that we haven't really talked too much in depth on. We touched on it a little bit right at the beginning with SAT and ACT test prep. As you know, and I know, parents and students are always asking the question, which one should I take, right? Because somehow test prep specialists and professionals are supposed to be able to know that, like, because of what the student like appears to be when they walk in the door. I'm not sure what it is that we're supposed to know there, but we're supposed to be able to identify. And the go-to answer has, for the most part in the industry, in the test prep industry, has been, well, the best way to do it is take a combo tool. Some test prep companies have actually made these combo tests, and those are questionable sometimes as to whether or not they're truly kind of seeing the big picture and doing it the best it can do. But that tool was created, I think, to mainly reduce the amount of time needed to take an assessment or a test to give that answer. The second option, and probably right now the most utilized option, has been come in, take a practice test on one side on the ACT, take a practice test on the SAT, we'll get the results back, look at the score reports and see which one's best. And if that doesn't work, well, let's figure out whether or not you felt better coming out of one of the tests over the other. And really, those have, for the most part, been kind of the tool in which we decide which one is best for the student to take. It's not too far off. But Mindprint has come up with, through all of this data, without taking any additional steps in the assessment or testing process, like there's nothing extra you have to do, has generated a report that can help determine which of these would be the better of the two to take. Tell us a little, let's talk a little bit about this, because this, if the rest of it, just kind of falls by the wayside, which it shouldn't, this should definitely boil to the surface. So let's talk a little bit about this.
Well, okay, do you want the long answer or the short answer?
Oh, well, we got time. Well, not a whole lot of time, but
So for the first question to ask is this even a high stakes question? Right? A lot of test prep companies throw that out there and they're fear mongering. They're implying that you must know the answer to this question.
Right.
And we're going to give it to you. And it's a way to get folks in the door. And for many years, I actually believed that for most kids, it was not a high stakes answer. And now that I sit on data, there are a ton of kids for whom it is not high stakes. They're going to be fine one way or the other.
Right.
However, I now know, and I can now tell you, not as an opinion, but as someone who spends all day gathering data on these things, that the two tests are constructed differently. They do rely on a different combination of cognitive skills. And there absolutely are clear cases where a student has a stronger cognitive affinity for one test versus the other test. And I can even tell you what cognitive skills drive it.
Right.
But let's talk about how people are answering that question real quickly. So let's start with what I call the Franken diag. Let's do some kind of a combined thing. Do you happen to know when College Board creates a question item for the SAT? Do you know how long it takes them to create a single item, a single question?
Well, it's not overnight. I can assure you of that.
18 months.
Oh my gosh.
From when they very first write it, to testing it, to gathering the data on it, to refining it, to checking what's called the biserial correlation. Is it's doing its job of high score kids get it right and low score kids get it wrong, or is it random? Like 18 months is that process. Anyone who has sat down and cut off a little bit of an SAT and stuck it there, and a little bit of an ACT and stuck it there, and said, this is somehow going to yield real data,
Right.
it's just poppycock. I'm sorry, but it's that ain't science.
Right.
So like and like it's not even under standard test conditions, right? Like I don't know, like do you take it at home? Do you take like how does that work? So the combo tests, you can learn a lot as a super experienced tutor observing kids and seeing how they answer. But I can tell you, if it's a busy test prep company, they don't have time to pore over those results. Like that's not real. Then we've got take a full-length SAT and a full-length ACT, which is really time-consuming. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
You're burning full tests, real tests, for something that has no pedagogical value because you haven't taught the kid anything yet. So they're not trying out or practice any new skills yet. You're just making them take a test just so you can get the damn score.
Right.
And then it doesn't actually answer the question. Just because first of all, you're not taking it in standard conditions. You're taking it back to back. And just because you happen to have scored higher on the SAT doesn't mean that that's going to be ultimately the best test for you. In fact, what we see is kids with weak attention in particular have an enormous amount of fluctuation in scores. So if you take your full-length SAT on Saturday and your full-length ACT on Sunday, and on Saturday you slept well, ate well, and you're focused and you have a good attention day. On Sunday, you're exhausted, you're pissed off, you don't want to be there, you have a bad attention day, right? Like now you're going to get these, you're going to get a false positive or a false negative.
Right.
And that's not science.
No.
But in truth, you could take a 1 hour mind print. We're going to measure your cognitive skills. And what we've been able to do is map those cognitive skills to test scores using a really big data set that allows us to project test scores. And now we can actually, when we put those two things side by side, the projected ACT and the projected SAT, we can actually see from a cognitive standpoint, not only which test do you have a stronger affinity for,
Right.
but we can also tell you why, right? Let's get back to that why question, because that's what you need to learn.
That's right.
And we can even quantify it, right? I can tell you by how much. Maybe it's only like 10 points, in which case let's go student preference, no big deal. But maybe it's 100 points. And then there's a very clear right answer and a very clear wrong answer.
Interesting. Now it's possible though that when those results come back, that they're not deviating from one another very much.
No, and that happens a lot.
Sure.
That happens a lot.
And those are the ones, if I'm correct, those are the ones you mentioned earlier that they're not going to, they can go either direction, and they always could.
Yeah, and then you pick the one the kid likes better.
Yeah.
Like, why not pick the one they feel better doing?
Correct.
If there's not a clear reason to go one direction or the other. And then the other thing that we face is that when there's a lack of science and a lack of data, you get like these little mushrooms of myth start springing up everywhere. I was on a test prep forum, I don't know, like a month ago, and someone said, I have a kid who came in with a really low SAT start score, like 3-digit start score, and a combined score of an 850 or a 900 or something. And a whole bunch of tutors jumped on and they said, oh, if it's a really low score, you go ACT. You always go ACT. It's more straightforward. And I wanted to rip my hair off.
Yeah.
Like, that might be true for some kids, but I can show you kids for whom that is absolutely palpably not true.
Right.
And these are people who have been doing it for a long time. They get paid a lot of money. They're super experienced, and they, like, these myths are out there.
Right.
Because again, everyone's been going on hunches and intuitions for years. And that's not where, like, they need to catch up to where the cognitive science now is, right? It used to be locked up in academia, but is now actually has a pathway to the street where we can make use of it. And if you are not, as far as I'm concerned, that is tutoring malpractice.
That's a great point. Now, we've talked a lot about the SAT, ACT kind of tool, and we've also spent a lot of time talking about even the younger ages, getting involved in that assessment, understanding them a little bit more. As a added benefit to taking these assessments, do you call them assessments or tests, Neill?
I call it an assessment.
Okay.
Test sounds scary.
Some people are really picky about what's an assessment and what's a test, so I want to make sure I was calling it right thing. But as an added benefit, there's access to what you refer to on your website as a personalized learning plan. And of course, I'm very familiar with it, of course, so I'm bringing it up on purpose because it is so phenomenal. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how a student or parent or educator / tutor, whomever there, could actually utilize that data, that plan?
So I like to, when I'm talking to tutors, when I'm training tutors, I like to say the easiest thing in the world is to explain this concept in a way that is clear, that is powerful, that is compelling. The hardest thing to do in the world of test prep is to get them to actually do it on test day. Right? Like, we are in the behavior modification business. We are not in the content business. Right? Like, you give them the content, that's fine, and you got to fill in gaps. But ultimately, when they're under pressure, you got to get them to do something different. And that's hard. That's really hard. And you really have only a few opportunities. Like you can't give a kid 30 strategies. That's tantamount to giving them none. Now there's like more things for them to keep track of, and they can't even pay attention to the test in front of them. Right. So what the personal learning plan does is we've got a big database of evidence-based strategies that have been out there, tested in the real world, measured accurately, that we know are effective.
Yeah.
But what we do is we organize them by best fit by mapping them to the cognitive skills.
Interesting.
So someone goes and takes a Mindprint, and then what automatically will bubble up, and we do it by subject area. So whether you're studying for math or for English or humanities, what will bubble up first and foremost are the strategies of best fit in decreasing order. And again, it's back to this notion of right strategy, right kid, right time. Let's start with a couple of ones that are going to matter the most, the high impact one. And let's just start there.
Right.
Let's get those right, turn those into habits, get the kids using those. We use a lot of checklists because that's just critical for turning things into habits.
Yeah.
Get those right. And then, okay, if the kids master that, turned into a habit, now we can move on to strategy 4, 5, and 6.
Right.
But like, don't you dare talk about strategy 4, 5, and 6 before you made damn sure the strategies 1, 2, and 3 are there. And it's the same thing with test prep, right? Like I could spend all day trying to teach your kid matrices questions for the ACT, but they might not even see one. Like, or maybe they'll see one. Like, that's not where the points are going to come from.
Correct. Start
with the high impact. Like, once they're getting every single other question right, okay, fine, let's talk about the matrices question. But if you're going to spend some of your hard-earned, tutoring dollars, just going deeper into arcana, that's not a winning strategy.
No.
And it doesn't make it to test day.
No.
I got to tell you. So there's opportunity cost in going too broad. But like, rather than cover everything, let's start with a scalpel and let's go in there and use real data and real information to pick those strategies that are going to be the most impactful.
Right.
Get those right. And then go from there.
Yep. Maximizing learning. You got to know what's under the hood, right? And understanding exactly what's happening in that brain is imperative. So,
and also, like, tutoring ain't cheap, right? So
no, it's not.
So like, are you going to spend valuable tutoring dollars while the tutor figures out your kid through trial and error?
Right.
Like, I'm going to get 3 sessions and go, oh, that didn't work. Let me try something different.
Right.
That's not a winning formula.
Exactly. Well, here's some exciting news. I mean, if you've hung on with us this long, it's important, I think, for you to know that Mindprint Learning and Capstone Educational Consultants have been having conversations for quite some time. We are actually utilizing Mindprint's cognitive assessments right here in Peachtree City. In fact, Capstone Educational Consultants is the only location in the state of Georgia that's utilizing these resources, and we are extremely excited to be doing that. We are integrating it into our test prep program. We're integrating it into our academic learning and tutoring. This is all part of the journey to college, and that's why tonight we're talking about it on College Journey Conversations, because this is a valuable tool to use, not just in 2nd grade, in 10th grade, in 12th grade, but it's actually going to be a tool, as you've demonstrated, is one in real life, right, outside of the academe, and as you're going off to college, even knowing what's and how to address those issues that come up cognitively. So we're excited to be a part of it. We're excited to be a site that utilizes Mindprint's resources. And we'd love to have a conversation with anybody who wants to about that. We were talking about that test prep determination, which one or that testing determination between ACT or SAT. And I was sitting here calculating just in my head, if you want to figure out if you want to take an ACT, you got to spend 3 hours taking a practice test. And if you want it to be maybe an SAT, then you got to spend 3 hours taking a practice test.
Dinosaurs. That's what the dinosaurs are doing.
We've already like calculated 6 hours, and in an hour, right,
Yeah.
or less, we can determine that very same thing, and really be closer to the target than we were before, with great data.
I think it's worth reiterating here that the test isn't, it's not like something they're going to see in school. It actually, I mean, they don't know this yet, but it's kind of fun. Like
Right.
once the kids start it, they finish it, and they're always intrigued. It feels like brain games. They're not going to hate you for making them do it.
No, not at all.
It's
In
kind of
fact,
cool.
I have to confess, because my family were guinea pigs for this, right? So I got to administer them, and there was a few of them, varying age groups. So I had upper teens, middle teens, lower under teens, right? All taking it, and the reactions were just really honestly fun to watch. Because you're right. It's like little mind games that you're playing, and in some cases, they're doing this all day long on the video games that they're playing. They just don't realize it. And this we're actually collecting data from, which is phenomenal for me. So, but you're absolutely right. It is a lot of fun to take. It's far. The fun thing is you don't need to know the answer to anything.
Yeah, no, you're not going to get a grade. You're not going to get a
grade, and you don't need to know the answer to anything. So
I like to say it's descriptive in nature. It's not a scorecard.
No, it's not.
Like we're not trying to change the score. What we're trying to do is know the kid.
Fantastic. Super excited, Neill, that you were with us tonight. I'm so excited to be a part of Mindprint Learning, and the resources and education that you guys are providing, from Maine to Georgia, which is with a little stop off in New York City. Which
we'll just bracket the whole East Coast.
That's right. We're a part of a grander picture that I think, as you noted earlier, is the beginning of something that will likely become a norm. And we're excited to be a part of that. How in the world can people get in touch with Mindprint Learning or you, Neill, if they would like to learn more about it? If they didn't want to come to me, because we can answer those too. But what about you?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, thank you for having me. And it's been an absolute pleasure. I don't want to work with people and organizations and professionals that aren't at the top of their game, right? Like that's going to make my results and our tests look bad. I want to work with people who are caring, who are thoughtful, and who are in it to help the kids. And so, it's why I'm delighted to be here, and I'm happy and proud that it's part of part of your whole team.
Yeah,
and it's an honor that you guys have taken it on. The short answer to your question is that I would frankly rather have them contact Capstone.
Awesome.
Because you guys are the ones who are really ultimately going to interface with the student.
Right.
I mean, I'm Neill at Mindprint Learning, Neill with 2 L's. I'm happy to take emails, but if you need help with your student, I can help with the assessment. But what they need to do is go to Capstone and get a tutor.
Right. Well, I'm Mark with 1K. And that was a little joke, a little fun at the end. But definitely, we'd love to talk with you. You'll find right on the front page of Capstone's website, capstoneed.com. You can go there and scroll down. You'll see a huge banner that we've dedicated directly to Mindprint's information. You can learn a lot more about it there. I believe there might be some links to your website there as well. But we can administer those assessments right here in our office here in Peachtree City. And in many cases, this assessment can be done at home. And so we can proctor it. We can proctor it live through Zoom. which we do all the time, and would love to be a part of that. So don't be surprised if you get some test prep with Capstone that you might have to take a Mindprint learning assessment before we get started, because we want to know a little bit about you under the hood. And that way we can better serve our families and better serve our students in the process.
And it's more efficient, and we're going to get better outcomes and more consistent outcomes.
Yep,
right? Like, don't leave it to chance.
Super. Thank you so much, Neill, for being with us. Tell all your friends and family back at Mindprint Learning when you get back in New York City that we said thank you. And we hope all the best in your travels back home to New York City. And until next time, we'll see you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And I look forward to working with your kids.
Bye now.
Okay.